My Playful Wife, Episode 9, Closer, written by Mia. What happened after the kitchen, after she held me, after the 20-minute phone call to Bengaluru, after the thing lifted that she'd been carrying, was not what I had constructed in my imagination. I had imagined a conversation, the long one, the one that had been accruing mass for months, the one in which all the things we had not said would be finally said. I had imagined it as a kind of clearing, painful but ultimately clean, the way surgery is painful but ultimately clean. But Saloni did not work that way. She never had. What she did instead, she made chai. She carried 2 cups to the living room. She sat down on the couch and put the cups on the table, and she looked at me and she said, "Come here." Not demanding, not pleading, simply, "Come here." An instruction given by someone who knows exactly what she needs and has decided to ask for it. I came there.
You sat beside her.
Properly beside her, not at the careful distance we had sometimes kept, but close, the way we had sat in the first months of our marriage before we had sorted out our habits and settled into the particular spatial arrangement of 2 people who have decided, without discussing it, how they will occupy a couch together. She picked up the remote and turned on something. A film, not new, one we had started watching the previous year and abandoned halfway through for reasons I couldn't remember. She turned it on and set the remote down and didn't say anything. We watched. Or, she watched and I sat beside her, and the film moved through its story, and I became aware, slowly, over the first 20 minutes, of the particular quality of her presence beside me. Not manufactured, not performing comfort, just her, in her own body, in her own flat, watching a film with her husband on an ordinary February evening. My chest, which had been carrying something like a stone since October, felt lighter. This was what she had known to give. Not words. She had understood that words would try to resolve something that was not ready to be resolved. That resolution was not actually what was needed. What was needed was this, the ordinary, the film. The 2 cups of chai going cold because neither of us was drinking. The city outside doing its thing. The specific weight of 2 people sitting close enough to feel each other's warmth. Halfway through, she leaned against me. Her shoulder against my arm. Her head tipping toward my collarbone. Not resting there, just near it. The movement of a woman finding a comfortable position that happened to involve the person beside her. I did not move. The film continued. The chai got cold. The city went on. "You're different now," she said. The film had reached the part we'd abandoned before. I could tell from the slight shift in her attention, the sharpening of it, the way she sat forward slightly. She said it without turning, looking at the screen. "Yes," I said. "From before October." "Yes." "I've been watching it happen," she said. "Watching you change. She paused. Strange. To watch a person become someone else while being the same person. I thought about this. About whether becoming was the right word. "I don't think I became someone else," I said. "I think I became more of who I was. More completely." She turned and looked at me. The film continued behind her, the screen lighting her face from one side. "Is that what it feels like?" she said. "Yes," I said. "More real. More actually myself than I was before. Even the painful parts, especially those, maybe." She absorbed this. "October hurt you," she said. Not a question. "Yes," I said. It's still hurting you. Less, I said, differently. She turned back to the screen, her shoulder still against my arm. I never wanted that, she said. The hurt. I know, I said. I know you know. I just need to keep saying it. Then keep saying it, I said. A pause. The film. I never wanted to hurt you, she said again. And I chose things that hurt you anyway. And I keep choosing them. And you keep, she stopped. You keep staying. And I don't fully understand it. I'm not sure I fully understand it either, I said. She turned again, looking at me with an expression that was open, genuinely open, the way she was not often genuinely open, the way the management she brought to everything else dropped away in very particular moments. Why? She said. Really? Not the answer you've built, not the framework. Why, actually? I thought about this with the honesty it deserved. Because you're the most real person I know, I said. And I would rather live in a complicated real thing than a simple pretend thing. She looked at me for a long moment. That's brave, she said. Or stupid, I said. Both, she said. The best things usually are. She kissed me. Before that, in the moment just before, she looked at me with an expression I want to try to describe because it was distinct from any I had seen on her face before. It was not desire, though desire was in it. It was not tenderness, though that was in it too. It was something more specific, the look of a person who has been choosing something for months, who has been maintaining a choice under difficult conditions, and who has just been given a piece of evidence that the choice was right. Not the whole evidence. You never get the whole evidence about anything before you're required to commit. But enough. She looked at me the way you look at something that has proved itself. She kissed me. There was no announcement to it. No buildup of tension and release. No choreographed moment. She simply turned further toward me and kissed me, her mouth warm and certain, the familiar knowledge of it mixed now with something I hadn't felt before, or hadn't let myself feel, or hadn't known to reach for. The kiss was brief. When we pulled back, she was looking at me with an expression that was surprised. She had surprised herself. I could see it clearly, the slight widening, the adjusting. What? I said. Nothing, she said. You're, she searched for the word, different. In the way you're here. Right now. You're more here than you used to be. I thought about the gym, about Samir's notebook, about the months of paying attention, and the way it had changed not just my mind, but my body's relationship to where it was the practice of being actually present rather than managing presence from a slight remove. I've been practicing, I said. Practicing what? Being here, I said. Not managing from a distance. Being actually in the room. She looked at me. She looked at me the way you look at something you have known for a long time and have just understood differently. Good different, I said. She smiled, the real one, from the stomach. Yes, she said, good different. Something shifted in our nights after that. I want to say something true about this shift. Something that might be useful to anyone who finds themselves in a complicated version of love and wonders whether it can still be beautiful. It can. I'm going to be careful here about what I share and what I keep because some intimacies belong to the people inside them and don't become more true by being explained. But this much I will say. The nights changed. Not because the circumstances had changed. Piyush was in Bengaluru. The arrangement was what it was. The truth of what I knew had not been erased. None of that had changed. What had changed was me. The months of building the framework, the gym, the notebooks, the phone calls, the practice of looking rather than looking away, the daily choice of the second road. All of that had done something to me that had nothing to do with management or tolerance or being a good person. It had made me more present,
more in my body,
more capable of receiving what was being given. She came to me differently, not more frequently, not with more elaborateness, with more of herself. Not more frequently, not with more elaborateness, with more of herself. With the register I had heard through walls and closed doors, the unguarded one, the one that existed below the professional and the domestic, brought into the room, brought directly to me. I had been her husband for 3 years. I was receiving, in those nights, a version of her I had not had access to before. Not because she had been withholding, she hadn't. She had given everything she knew how to give. But the giving had been from behind a glass. The glass was thinner now. She came to me warmed. Sometimes I knew from what, sometimes I didn't, and chose not to ask. She came to me with a full heat of herself, with the voice I knew but had only recently been given directly, and I received her with the completeness I had been building toward, not performing reception, not managing it, but actually open to it. It was the best it had ever been between us. I want to say that carefully because it is a careful thing. The pain and the pleasure were not separate compartments. They were part of the same thing. The grief I had been carrying since October was not incompatible with the love I felt now, in those nights. In fact, the grief had deepened the love, had made it more specific, more considered, more chosen. I was not loving Saloni despite what I knew. I was loving her through it. This is what the months of sitting with the second road had produced. Not resolution, not the clean ending of difficulty, but a love that had been made, by difficulty, into something more real. One evening in March, 3 months after the call to Bengaluru, I came home to find Saloni's phone ringing on the kitchen counter, his name on the screen. She wasn't in the room. I could hear her in the workroom, deep in something. The phone rang. I picked it up and walked to the workroom doorway. I held it out to her. She looked at the screen. She looked at me. Something moved through her expression. Not guilt, not calculation, but something more like the specific feeling of being seen accurately by someone who knows you. "Go ahead," I said. She took the phone. She answered it. And she stayed at the workroom table, with the door open, with me able to hear if I chose to hear, and she talked to him for 20 minutes, her voice in the warm register, the private one. Not hiding from me, not performing privacy, simply being herself completely in a room where I was also. This, I thought, was what we were building. Not a situation that excluded anyone, not a secret that had to be managed. A life that was big enough to contain what was actually in it.
When she hung up, she looked at me. "He says hello," she said.
"Tell him I said it back," I said. She nodded. She went back to her work. I went to make dinner. Outside, March, the particular smell of it, the city warming, the days getting longer. Inside, our flat, our life, the ongoing complicated daily work of being two specific people in a specific marriage that had been broken open and put back together as something truer. I made rice. I made dal. I called her when it was ready. She came to the kitchen in her workroom clothes, ink on her hands from her pen, a smear of something on her forearm, and she sat at the table, and she looked at the food, and she looked at me.
"Thank you," she said.
"For dinner?" I said.
She shook her head,
her eyes very clear.
"For all of it," she said.
I sat down across from her. "Eat," I said. "It'll get cold." She picked up her fork. She was smiling. Outside the city, inside, the two of us, in the version of our marriage that had required losing something to find something better. Not the loss of anything that had been real, but the loss of the comfortable distance from which we had been loving each other without fully knowing it.
Closer now.
Both of us. We finished the film. Neither of us had been watching it properly since the middle. The story had continued on the screen, but we had been elsewhere, in the specific elsewhere of two people who are sitting together and being conscious of sitting together. When it ended, she turned off the television, and the room was quiet. "I want to say something," she said. "Say it," I said. She was looking at the dark screen. "I've been afraid," she said, "that learning to see me would make you want less of me." She paused. "That the more you understood, the less you'd want." I looked at the side of her face. The specific quality of her in that moment, not performing bravery but exercising it. The difference was visible if you knew what to look for. "Has that happened?" I said. "No," she said. "Then that tells you something," I said. She turned and looked at me. "It tells me you're either extraordinary or you love me," she said. "Probably both," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. In her eyes, in the dim room, something moved, a wave of something that was too large and too real to be named quickly. "I love you," she said. She said it the way she said important things. Plainly, without decoration, the way you state a fact that has been true for a long time and is still true and always will be true. I know that probably gets complicated given everything. I know there are other things too, but that one is just true. I held what she had said. 3 years of marriage, and she had said this, regularly, ordinarily, across dinner tables and in the dark. But I had never heard it the way I heard it now, because now I knew what it was being said alongside. Now I understood the full complexity of the person saying it and the full reality of what she was choosing. She loved me, fully, alongside everything else that was also true. "I know," I said. "I've always known." She looked at me. "And I love you," I said. "The full version of you, not the simplified one. All of it." She pressed her lips together, held it. "Okay," she said finally, very quietly. I reached over and took her hand off her knee and held it, her hand in mine in the dark room, the city outside, the life we were building out of the complicated real materials of who we actually were. She leaned against me, her head finding its place at my shoulder. We stayed. The city went about its night. The flat held us. The complicated, beautiful, difficult, alive thing that was our marriage continued, as it did every day, to be what it was. Chosen. Real. Worth the cost. She told me something else that night. After the film, after what had happened, after the room had settled into the particular quiet of two people who have been through something and are on the other side of it. She told me about the first time she had understood what she was. Not what she was to Piyush, not the arrangement, what she was to herself. The kind of person she was. I was 18, she said, before we'd met. Someone I cared about. I won't say more than that. He left, and I cried for 2 days, and then I got up and I felt she stopped. I felt full, which was wrong, you'd think, but I felt full of everything, of the grief and the love and the next thing, whatever it was. She was looking at the ceiling. I've always been like this, she said. Too much. Too full. I love too much. I feel too much. I want things at the same time that are contradictory. I know, I said. Most people find that, she stopped again. Overwhelming. I said. Yes. I don't, I said. She turned and looked at me. I know you don't, she said. That's the thing I keep learning about you, that you don't. I held her gaze. It's not a virtue, I said. I'm not noble about it. It's just you're the most alive person I know, and I'd rather be next to alive than comfortable. She looked at me for a long time. Okay, she said finally. Okay. She turned back to the ceiling. We lay in the dark together, her warmth beside me, the city outside, the ongoing life we were building out of the complicated real materials of who we actually were. I kept thinking about what she had said. I've always been like this. Too much. Too full. And what I had said, I'd rather be next to alive than comfortable. These were true things, the truest we had said to each other, and they had the particular quality of true things. They changed the room they were set in, made it larger. To be continued in episode 10, the question.
Simbolo di copyright mia.
All rights reserved. That was episode 9 of my Playful Wife. If this story is staying with you, the next episode is already waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The complete book is on Amazon, and early episodes plus bonus chapters are on my Patreon. Links are in the description.
I've Mia.
Thank you for listening.